Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris and welcome to week 3 of our weekly LEGO Elves review series, where I believe it is one of the most underrated LEGO themes ever. Last time we took a look at 2015, the introduction to Elvendale, and 2016, the Dragon Year, but 2017 is arguably one of the best years of not just LEGO Elves, but all of LEGO original storytelling in general. This is the year where Elves got a Netflix show of its own, and the story got a lot deeper, it got animated by an incredible studio, and sadly, this is also the year that performed the worst in terms of sales. So we're gonna dive in to why is LEGO Elves 2017 so underrated, maybe why didn't it do so well, and what did that mean for the future of LEGO Elves? Let's go. So this is LEGO Elves 2017, a bit of a scale back from the previous year with only 8 sets instead of 10, but these sets featured a brand new aesthetic, focusing on the goblins and the Goblin King as the collectibles of the wave, and featuring the elves wielding weapons for the first time as the stakes got even higher. The theme also introduced the sister of Emily, Sophie, who plays a supporting role throughout the story, and showcased our first evil dragon yet, the Goblin King's evil dragon, which in my opinion is one of the best dragon sets that Elves ever put out. This wave featured a really interesting aesthetic of miniature buildings juxtaposed against the regular style of Elves buildings alongside more vehicles than really we had ever seen before. It also introduced some new characters like Rosalind the Healer, someone from the Goblin King's past, and really delved deep into the story and animation. LEGO Elves 2017 was arguably the best year for the theme in terms of story, because it received an original Netflix TV series consisting of 8 22-minute episodes. This was animated by the legendary Studio Mir, known for Avatar: The Legend of Korra and a ton of other animated shows, meaning the animation quality was among the best out of really any other LEGO show. The stakes and story were much deeper than ever, and this is really where LEGO Elves got very complex in terms of its storytelling, telling a layered, multi-dimensional villain who had realistic motivations, and also having a full-on lore and backstory for where he came from and his past, which was one of the most interesting developments in the LEGO Elves franchise. Altogether, the set wave was split between most of the sets coming out in March of 2017, with the primary bulk of the wave 5 initial sets releasing in March, and then finally in June of 2017, 3 final sets released to wrap up the year. Unlike many of the other years though, the storytelling wasn't necessarily chronological in the way that these sets were released. Instead, the people who worked on the TV show had the full range of sets to draw from, and because of that, a lot of these summer sets appear very early in the story, and even one of the smallest early March sets doesn't appear until one of the final episodes. And since we're telling the story in chronological order of the lore, we're going to be jumping around a little bit based on what actually is encountered first. And so we're just going to start off by taking a look at all of the LEGO Elves 2017 minifigures as a whole, then see the animals, and then we jump into the first set that we actually encounter on our journey. Okay, so here's a look at all the mini dolls and mini characters included in the 2017 lineup of LEGO Elves sets. And yeah, that's a lot of goblins. But we're actually going to start off by taking a look at the main cast first. Joining the main cast this time is Sophie Jones, younger sister to Emily, who accompanies her to Elvendale and later gets wrapped up in the plot to steal Emily's amulet necklace, which actually is its own separate piece this time, molded individually for the first time. While the LEGO designers did try to attempt to give Sophie Jones shorter legs, and they did look into it for mini dolls, back then they did try it and said the proportions just weren't really working out and it looked a little bit wacky, so they chose to give her normal legs, which is a little bit unfortunate because she is supposed to be a younger character, but they just didn't really have the technology to do that at the time. Emily, in this case, wields a golden sword, which is a pretty cool weapon for Emily to use, and then as we get to the elves, some of them actually do feature their own weapons, like a boomerang for Ira, and even a little flame element for Azari, although this would get a lot more upgrades by the time we reach the 2018 wave. The elves this time around had specially upgraded armor and different outfit detailings. I especially like Ira's outfit here showcasing the multicolored feathers, and Farron actually has a really cool outfit with this copper armor plating on the top of the shoulder there. I just wish that printing did extend a little bit to the arms, but it is still really cool how they continuously got new outfits. Otherwise, Basically, what you see is pretty much standard for LEGO Elves. We did get a nice recolor of the dual molded skirt piece for Azari, this time in gold and the magenta coloration instead of the flame yellowish orange, and in fact a lot of the other skirt pieces were recolored. Unfortunately though, Ira's is downgraded by no longer having an extra bit of printing on the underside of the skirt. Moving into the main villain, we have Cronin, the Goblin King. Cronin initially appears as an ally of the elves and deceives them until eventually his evil intentions are made clear. Cronin has a romantic past and history with the other side character introduced, Rosalind, which we'll get into as we dive into the story, but taking a look at the minifigure by himself, I think it's really cool how they produced a dual color cape for Cronin. He has purple on the top, red on the inside. He also has the specialized new mold for the amulet around his neck in green, showcasing his mother being trapped inside, and it is a really well-produced minifigure, and it's cool to get a male villain for the first time, because previously we just were dealing with more female-oriented characters, and it's good to get a bit of diversity in a theme like this. The only other mini-doll character we got was Rosalind, the healer. She was basically in exile, operating out of the healing hideout after the events happened between her and Cronin, but eventually is convinced to join the fight against the goblins, helping the elves as they defeat the Goblin King. Rosalind also has a dual-sided cape in dark blue and magenta, another very, very cool piece. You also have dual molding for the coloration of white and aqua for the skirt there, being that she is a water elf, and she is armed with a bow, which looks super cool in the live action. Obviously, as you can see, instead of baby dragons this time, we have small little goblins being a collectible of sorts for the year. And I'm genuinely really impressed by just how many of these they made. They did not scrimp on the goblins, and in previous years I did complain, if you watch the other videos of prior weeks, of LEGO not including enough characters in the sets. Well, they seem to have course-corrected with the goblins, including a whole host of different multicolored collectible goblins for you to join to form the ranks of the Goblin King. Every single one of these goblins had a name and an identity, and the only one really worth mentioning is that they did try to call one of them Trumplin, because obviously this came out around 2016-17, and we all know what was going on in America during that time. Sadly, LEGO did shoot down naming one of the goblins Trumplin, as I imagine that would have caused them some problems in the US, but the visceral hatred the LEGO Elves team, or at least certain team members, had for Donald Trump is honestly unparalleled in a LEGO theme and deserves to be documented, to the point where they managed to sneak in a webisode parodying Donald Trump's The Apprentice, calling it Evil Apprentice and utilizing his signature quotes. Of course, moving alongside from the goblins, we also have a host of new animals introduced. We get a new coloration for the baby dragon here, which is a pet of Rosalind, and we also got a whole host of other elves-themed animals, including some small bears, hamsters, even an elves chameleon alongside a squirrel, a bear, and an evil-looking black raven, which is actually meant to represent a shadow creature which Cronin summons, which eventually becomes a much bigger threat for the heroes to face over the season. But now, with the characters summed up, let's dive into the first set we encounter in our story, which actually has nothing to do with the first wave, and was the smallest set to be released for the summer wave. So the first set that we encounter in the story is actually 41186 Azari and the Goblin Forest Escape. It retailed for $20 or 20 euros when it launched on June 1st, 2017 as part of the summer wave, and came with 145 pieces, which in today's money is around $25. It included only 2 minifigures, the Azari mini doll as well as one of the goblins named Guxlin, who is exclusive to this set. Now this is a really interesting model because it features a brand new recolor of the LEGO Elves horse as well as a new flame yellowish orange, or as Bionicle fans know it to be, Keat orange recolor of the Elves Pegasus wings, and the entire thing is focused on an escape in the chariot through the Goblin Forest. The way the story kicks off is Emily is back in Elvendale and she's showing her sister Sophie Jones this new world, who really wanted to be able to experience Elvendale for herself. Along their travels, they catch up with some of the old characters that we met last year in the previous Dragon storyline, and meet Cronin for the first time, who is seemingly captured by some mischievous and vicious goblins. They free Cronin, who is incredibly charming. In fact, it's love at first sight for 2 out of the 5 main character elves with him, and they take him back to their treehouse where they get to know Cronin a little bit more. When he tries to go on a solo walk with Emily, however, her sister is pretty dubious of Cronin, not trusting his intentions and warns Emily not to go, so she declines and Cronin eventually leaves. When the goblins are sent to actually kidnap Emily, they mess up and accidentally set the elves' treehouse on fire, permanently destroying our main location, which was introduced in 2015. Now, in LEGO shows, this typically means that a brand new headquarters would be introduced, but unfortunately, they didn't really introduce a new headquarters in 2017. We'd have to wait till 2018 for that. Instead, the elves are essentially now homeless. Their treehouse home burned down, and then they have to make use of this chariot to transport themselves around. They go on a joyride with the chariot while Sophie manages to investigate Cronin, and that leads us to the next phase of the story. And we later on learn exactly why he was trying to kidnap Emily in the first place. This chariot would be used throughout the story as a means of transportation, flying through storms, traversing through the forests, and trying to travel through the Goblin Forest, which is really what this set is trying to depict. Setting the minifigures aside and placing Azari in the chariot, let's just see how this actually plays as a function. So, you have a little bit of the infected Goblin Forest here, and I really like the aesthetic they did here with these snapping plants. I think it is a very, very cool aesthetic to have for almost like an Outland style of feel, that it shows that this is a more dangerous part of the elves' forest. There are these little recolored bionicle voodoo ball joint pieces with mouthpieces on them, which is very funny to see, just recolored for smaller baby versions of these plants, and the main feature is that you can actually go ahead and knock over one of the plants, presumably by going like this and activating the action feature of the set, which is pushing this piece out, will allow you to unfurl the fire elements on the side here, and if you do it just right, boom, maybe that was a little bit too strong. Let me just try to hit it like this. Boom, there you go. Then that is going to be knocked over, and that is how you defeat the plant monster. Now, as you can see, they actually were able to recolor the LEGO Hero Factory elemental energy element, which they introduced for Brain Attack in 2013, in a really nice transparent pink and transparent yellow format. We already got a flame-colored version of this element, so they didn't even need to recolor it, but I'm very happy they did, because it looks incredibly striking on the set, and I like the play feature, which allows you to really unfurl it like actual wings to allow this to fly in the sky. You have one of those Nexo Knights firing crossbow elements integrated in tan here, and I also love the recolor of the Pegasus horse. Plus, it's always good to get a goblin opponent as well. Since it was $20, this probably would have been the kind of LEGO set that for other waves of LEGO Elves, they wouldn't have included an enemy, but since the goblins are so small, they were able to throw one in, which I really do appreciate. Now, talking about value of this set, $20 in 2017, so $25 today, is a little bit steep, and even back then it was pretty steep because you don't really get a ton with this set. You get the small chariot and you get this little plant build. However, it's not really fair to go by the amount of pieces because you do get a brand new dual mold of the horse in magenta and flame yellowish orange. You get the recolor of the large wing pieces, you also get the recolor of the fire pieces, and you get the large chariot wheels, which would later be used in Bionicle G2 in 2015 actually, I guess earlier be used there, and also originated from Disney Princesses, which is a really nice ornate piece. So overall, in terms of the play value, I'd say this feels like it is a $20 set today, which means that back then it probably should have been closer to $15, but I think it's okay. It's not the best value because you aren't getting a ton for what you're paying for, but it is admittedly a lot of fun to swoosh this around, to actually activate the play feature, and it serves as a really good jumping off point to the story of LEGO Elves, even though it was part of the summer wave and not the first one. But now let's go ahead and progress the story, because while the 5 main characters are riding around in the chariot, soaring through the skies and recuperating from their losses of the treehouse, Sophie is following Cronin into the forest where she learns a terrifying secret. And that's where we get to our next set. So the next step in the story is Sophie uncovering Cronin's true intentions as Goblin King. She witnesses him leading the goblins, and eventually the goblins are bid to capture the human with rounded ears. Unfortunately, they capture the wrong human, Sophie instead of Emily. Later on, we realize that Cronin wants Emily's amulet in order to free his mother from his medallion. His mother years ago had trapped herself in the medallion after trying to tap into dark magic to open a portal to conquer Earth, and Cronin will stop at nothing to free his mother, and eventually rule alongside her. which is why he really needs the amulet around Emily's neck. Unfortunately, the goblins are fairly dim-witted and capture the wrong human, which eventually does lead to the elves discovering Cronin's true intentions because this squirrel witnesses the entire capture and goes back and reports to Farron that Cronin was the Goblin King. For what they are, these sets are remarkably lore accurate, and the designers and whoever was working on the show really did their best to factor in every aspect of the set into the story, or even a small throwaway little creature like the squirrel actually had a role to play witnessing this capture and then reporting it back to the elves. This kind of set and show integration is honestly kind of unheard of in a lot of other LEGO themes, and it's something that really makes it fun to play with the sets because it feels like they're all part of this shared universe and a lot of thought went into crafting the story. Now, in terms of the set itself, this is 41182, the capture of Sophie Jones. It retailed for $20 or 20 euros when it released on March 1st, 2017, and came with 226 pieces, which is once again around $25 or $26 today. This is actually pretty good value. It includes a unique minifigure to the set, which is Sophie Jones with an open mouth smile. She actually has a different facial expression for her other appearance, and the goblin is Barblin, who is also exclusive to the set as well, meaning that pretty much all the different characters here are exclusive. There are a lot of different things they have at play here, and one thing that the LEGO Elves team realized they could do was depict buildings at a smaller scale. They don't need to make buildings minifigure compatible, they can make them small character compatible. And so, this shop right here is selling acorns and bugs, and it's literally being run by the squirrel, so you can see there is a place for the squirrel to sit and run the shop, and there is that quintessential LEGO Elves bed included in there as well. More on that later. But we also have a portal which Sophie can crawl through. It's basically just an updated version of the portal which featured in the Elvendale Treehouse set in 2015, but I really appreciate that they included it in this set to allow kids to have another way to play with the portal and transport their characters to the Elvendale world. One of my favorite builds of the set, though, is this contraption right here. They actually use this in the show to great effect, but the way it works is you roll it around the ground, and the basket pops up and down. It's really funny. It's a very simple mechanism, but I actually really like the way it works. It's very jerky in the motion, which makes sense as kind of this evil-looking capture device, and the way you're supposed to do it is you get your goblin riding on this vehicle here, and then you just try to have it capture Sophie Jones. You just have to get it like right in the right spot to capture her. So it actually is kind of a bit of a tricky thing to do. Maybe she's unsuspecting, doesn't hear the clank, and then boom, almost, not quite. It is kind of like a little game that you have to just line it up at the right spot to get her captured, which is, let's see, just kind of cheating it here. That's how it's supposed to go. It's supposed to like really just cascade right over the head, and there you go, she is now captured by the goblins. It's a fun play feature, and I love the usage of the gunmetal gray basketball hoop as the net here. It just works super well, and it's a really fun play feature to actually capture a mini doll. Aside from this, though, there are a couple of other things that you can do with the set. The main build is this little building, which is scaled to the goblin villages, so it's a little bit smaller than mini doll scale, but here it's actually scaled to the little squirrel who is selling his or her wares, which you can see the acorns there, there's a little bug in a jar. I think it's just a cute little build, and I actually really like the little stickers adorning the inside of the build. You've got apples and acorns, you've got a little rug on the inside. There's a really nice little piece here that's just one of the newer pieces for 2017, this curved slope here, and on the top you have the quintessential LEGO Elves bed. If you haven't seen the other videos, I noted how almost every single LEGO Elves building set, for whatever reason, has a place for the characters to sleep. I don't know if that is like a mandate that they tried to include, like you must include a bed. I don't really know why. I think it's cute, but it's kind of funny how they literally do it for every single set without fail. If it's a building set, 99.9% of the time, there's gonna be a place for the characters to sleep. But with that, we'll move on and continue to progress the story. With Sophie Jones captured, the elves now realize that Cronin has been deceiving them the entire time. And so, what do? Well, they have to delve into the goblin territories to save Sophie. But along the way, they encounter a mysterious new ally, Rosalind, and that's where we start to progress to the next part of the story with her healing hideout. On their journey to the goblin territories to rescue Sophie from the clutches of Cronin the Goblin King, the elves encounter a wounded dragon who initially appears in trouble, but soon turns on them, viciously attacking them, showcasing it's been infected by evil magic. The only way to to free the dragon from the infection is to get a healer to save it. And so, Rosalind jumps onto the scene, introducing ourselves to the elves and healing the dragon accompanying the set itself. This is 41187 Rosalind's Healing Hideout. It came with 460 pieces and retailed for $50 or 50 euros back in June of 2017. It also featured 3 minifigures, 2 of which were unique to the set, Rosalind herself as well as one of the goblins, Rimlin. This is worth approximately $50 in 2017, is worth around $65 today, which is basically what this set would retail for. And now let's dive into the set. So there's actually quite a lot going on here. First, you have a baby dragon, one of the pets of Rosalind, which is a new coloration and dual mold for this particular year, and it's the last baby dragon mold we'd ever get from the Elves theme, and the main focus of the set is divided between this dragon, which Rosalind has to heal, which conveniently is also very much in her color scheme, as well as the Healing Hideout building. This is actually the only one of 2 buildings that is scaled around mini dolls this time around. Most of the other buildings are smaller scaled for the animals and the goblins, and this also features a small side build, which is maybe one of my favorite side builds of all time. It's so silly, it's so simple, but it works very well. And it basically is a baby dragon or animal trap. If the dragon wants to go ahead and, eat that yummy delicious cookie, the jaw of the plant will shut around the dragon. It's a little gruesome in the way that it works. It's actually just like a trap for these little animals, but I find it so funny how you could just trap this little baby dragon and the plant will slowly eat it. Yummy, yummy, yummy. And it's just a fun function. It works super well. It's very, very simple in the way it actuates. You basically have the jaws of the plant here, you push it forwards, and because of the way the pieces are aligned, it just snaps shut around the cookie. It's a really funny little trap, and I kind of wish they included more stuff like this in the sets because it just works so well. Moving to the other side build, this one is a little bit more simplified. It's just Nida wheeling this cart and honestly kind of feels like leftover budget, but I do like it how it actually can act as kind of a healing bed. If somebody actually gets injured, you can place the mini doll along here and have it act as a stretcher, so I guess it makes sense in the healing context. I'm going to start off by taking a look at the dragon first, because the dragons are easily the most interesting thing for the elves animals to me, and this one, I'm gonna be honest, it does suffer from a lot of the issues of the other elves dragons. As I pointed out many times in my review of the Dragon Year, they did this thing when designing the elves dragons to prevent articulation to make sure that they were a lot easier to stand up for younger kids. So if you want to pose the dragon with the legs splayed out like this, or even splayed to the side like this, have it like crouching down, well, you can't really do that because when connected, it is fixed in articulation. You can't bend the leg outside this point, and I do think that is genuinely one of the bigger problems I have with the elves sets in general, that you can't move these out like so. You can bend them inwards, but that's not really much use because that doesn't really look that cool, and you can kind of rotate them outwards when it's all the way stretched out, but there's not really much that you can do with it. It's really restricted in articulation, and I feel like that does hurt the aesthetics of a lot of the elves dragons because while I love the color schemes and the creativity into making them, the lack of articulation just makes them a lot less fun to pose. Thankfully though, they did fix some of the other problems in that you can actually move the head every direction you want. It's mounted on 2 different mixel joints, as well as a Technic kind of connector piece here, so that totally works out great. The jaw can snap open and shut utilizing the jaw elements they introduced for the Dragon Wave last year, and also you can get these movable wings which are mounted on only 1 Technic axle, allowing you to angle them in different directions, which I really do appreciate. The wings themselves are recolored in dark blue and transparent pink, which is a very nice color blend, and I like the inclusion of these additional wings here in aqua to really just add on to the color scheme. You have a crystal on the end of the tail here in trans pink, which ties into Rosalind's color scheme, having a crystal transparent pink pendant around her neck, and overall, love the color scheme of this dragon. This might be one of my favorite color schemes for the dragons yet, if only it had a little more articulation. Moving on to the main building of the set, the Healing Hideout. This actually is hiding a bit of a function. Since it is a hideout and it's meant to be a hidden bastion of healing, it kind of has a reveal. where if you push in a lever on the back, you can notice you can actuate the trees to actually move around, showcasing the hideout itself. I wish there was a little more foliage included because you can still clearly see that this is a building. I would have really liked it if the entire thing was like covered up in a dense canopy and then you push it outwards to reveal it. As it is right now, it kind of just feels like two moving tree branches, but I do appreciate the effort, and it does allow at least for modifications to be made. If you had more plant or foliage elements, you would go a little bit more crazy with the amount of reveal you want to pull off here. Once more, almost shoehorned in, there is a bed for Rosalind to sleep in. Again, every single elf set that has a building has to include a bed, and you have a symbol of the healing cross up there, as well as a really nice lower level where you can actually have some potions being cooked in terms of the healing level. They introduced a brand new print for this set, showcasing the metallic gold printed 1x1 tile there with the healing symbol. There is a mushroom here which is actually hiding some crowns on the inside. This crown is actually meant to go on Rosalind, hinting at her past. So you can see you can actually place the crown on top of Rosalind's head here. And there you have it, the mini doll is complete. So that's kind of what you're supposed to do there, indicating that she technically is like the Goblin Princess because she was romantically involved with Cronin at a certain point. So she does have that hidden crown there, which I do like as a hidden play feature. On the inside here, you've got lots of nice crystals, you have nice stickers on the side, as well as a nice and cozy interior with a fireplace, a welcome mat, and even some berries on the ground, alongside a little bit of extra depiction for the backstory behind the characters. Overall, it's a fairly simple build, and I definitely do feel that maybe it was a little overpriced for its time. $65 in today's money is really high for something like this, and I feel like this would be worth closer to 50, maybe even 45 in today's money, which means that back in 2017 it should have probably been 35 to 40 tops, not 50, but I do like the build for what it is. The dragon leaves a bit to be desired, especially after you compare it to the other water dragon, which was a similar size, but just way more articulatable, and you could do just so much more stuff with it. But as an important story location, I do love the color scheme. Having the dark blue color scheme integrated into elves is actually really cool, and I kind of wish that they delved into these darker shades a little bit more. Unfortunately, this would be one of the few buildings to actually have this darker color scheme, but I like it, and overall, aesthetic-wise it makes sense, story-wise it's cool to get Rosalind, although I do wish she appeared in more sets. And now we move on to the next step in their destination. As Rosalind reunites with the elves and joins them on their quest, she bids them to create an airship utilizing the power of the elements so they can fly over to the Goblin Village and free Sophie Jones. In one of the coolest animated sequences of the entire show, the elves work together utilizing their elemental powers to create an airship out of the materials around them. And that brings us to 41184, Ira's Airship and the Amulet Chase. It includes 3 mini dolls and minifigures, one of which being Emily Jones with her amulet alongside Ira with a boomerang, plus the lead goblin Dukelin, who was one of the most prominent goblins in the series. Altogether, the set is primarily focused on the airship, but it does also feature a little side build for a flying machine for the Goblin 2, and it retailed for $40 when it released in March of 2017 with 343 pieces. Adjusted for inflation, that would be around $50 today, which doesn't feel like good value until you remember that this is a pretty large airship that also factored in these really large hot air balloon elements, so a lot of the budget did go into producing that alongside the large white wings. But now let's dive into this set and see how we feel about the build in general. So, setting aside these small creatures, I do want to start off by taking a look at what is actually a really fun looking goblin flying machine. This is pretty cool because you can see the goblin on the inside, you can have the hand grip the controls there, so you can really put him in command of this vessel. It's kind of like a little winged backpack for the goblins to fly, and I think this is such a fun little feature. You can shoot flick fire missiles of the plants at your opponents, and it even has a little mailbox that is locked, which allows them to hold on to their printed goblin spell tiles inside the mailbox, which is a really nice touch because it allows you to have a very nice place to hold the accessories while you're not flying. So, moving alongside from this small build, I think it's pretty cute, and I think it makes sense to include kind of the chief goblin Dukelin officer here because he is chasing down the amulet. Let's move on to the main build itself, which is the airship. While admittedly I feel like this could have been a really good way to tie back one of the other story characters, Sierra from the previous year's story had an affinity for airships, so I think it would have totally made sense to have her maybe make this and join them on the quest. I think it also is cool that the elves just decided to make this out of their elemental powers, and it actually has one of the coolest play features of any LEGO Elves set. I kind of have the play feature in kind of a mid-transformation mode here because I think it looks the coolest this way. But the way it works is you start off, oh, look at that. You start off with the wings folded backwards alongside it, and it kind of acts as an actual boat. But when you're ready to take off and fly, you can push it inwards, boom, and the wings can be deployed folding outwards to allow it to actually have the wings in flight. This is such a cool transformation feature. It is seamless. It literally relies on just gravity. It just relies on these wing elements moving alongside the curves of the ship, but it's unlike any other transformation feature that we've seen in a flying LEGO vehicle before, and I have to commend the Elves design team for pulling off a very, very cool transformation. It also is just actuated by the rudder on the back here, where you can see you push it inwards or pull it outwards, and it's super simple. It just works, deploys like so. Very, very cool in the functionality and making this actually work as an actual feature. On the back here, you can see it is powered by these crystalline jet engines, which are very cool to see it being powered that way. It also uses the power of air using a gold recolor of the LEGO Atlantis propeller piece, which allows it to fly through the air. There's a steering wheel on the back, although unfortunately there is no back guardrail, so basically you have to mount your elf right here while steering and hope they don't fall off the back while in flight. Alongside the ship, though, there are these really nice, ornately detailed golden elements, which I really love. I love the fact that they are able to incorporate these in terms of a very nice curve along the ship, and they utilize the LEGO Hero Factory CCBS Chima Ultra Build armor element, which really only appeared in the Europe exclusive Wave 2 Ultra builds in the set to great effect. I love how on the front here, you can see they were even able to attach a compass to the front of the armor piece, pointing the way that you're supposed to go, and they even have this extra additional feature of an opening hatch, which allows you to access little bits and pieces inside the set, including where I put my extra copy of the amulet necklace there, which is just a really nice touch, as well as a book which Emily can use and look into in terms of, when you open it up, let's see what it reveals, how to make the airship itself. So there's instructions on how to actually make the airship, which is super cool, and I love that that's factored into the build itself. Altogether, color scheme wise and build wise, this is easily one of my favorite LEGO Elves sets. It is so cool how they were able to pull it off as a working airship, and while the price tag is kind of tough to swallow, $40 back then, which is $50 today, for the amount of pieces, oh man, it's tough because it doesn't seem fair. But I do love how they were able to pull it off. It reminds me of some of the best LEGO Ninjago Skybound airship sets, which came out just the year prior to this, and clearly it's borrowing a lot of sensibilities from that, but making it feel more ornate as an actual boat build, so it's hard to fault it. I like it, and I definitely feel like it is one of the stronger LEGO Elves vehicle sets they ever came out with. But as they pilot the airship on their journey to the Goblin lands, they soon come upon the Goblin Village, the largest set for the March wave, so let's take a look at that right now. The next set we have actually deviates from the story a little bit, and that is the Magic Rescue from the Goblin Village, set number 41185. In the storyline, Sophie Jones is held here in jail, where she gets to see the goblins going about their daily lives and realizes that they might not be all bad, but they might just be under the spell of the Goblin King. She realizes a way to break out after bribing one of the goblins with some food, and after running around the village, she somehow manages to control all of the goblins, bringing them to her side by playing an enchanted flute. Unfortunately, the Goblin King shows up and breaks up the fun, having Sophie Jones taken back to his castle because she can't be trusted around the Goblin Village. So, in the show, there was really no rescue, and this was just kind of a slice of life in terms of how the goblins live normally, but in the sets, this is a magic rescue. I will admit though, I'm a little bit confused as to who is being rescued here, because the entire plot is that Sophie has been captured, but Sophie is not present in the set. Instead, there are these two animals, which I guess maybe the animals are the ones in jail, and Azari and Farron have to free the animals. None of this ever happened in the show, but it's fun to come up with your own stories in these sets as well. When it released on March of 2017, the set retailed for $60 or 60 euros and came with 637 pieces, which is around $76 today. It also included 5 minifigures or mini characters, including the orange-haired goblin Beeblin, the purple-haired goblin Fiblin, and the pink-haired goblin Smilin. Beeblin, who wields a lute and is the singer for the goblins, is a reference to, of course, Justin Bieber. They didn't manage to get Trumplin in, but they did get a chance to make fun of at least one other real-world character by turning him into a goblin who just annoys everybody who hears his music, which I find really funny how they got away with that. Now let's take a look at the set by itself, because this is actually one of my favorite sets out of all of the LEGO Elves range. The designers stated that the set was based off of the medieval market village, and they basically were trying to make a smaller, scaled-down version of the classic castle set, and you can clearly see the influence coming in here, with different shops dedicated to different professions and all sorts of different buildings coming together in one scene. There's a small catapult, which allows you to fling the monstrous plants, but really this is just a side build, and the main build is focused on these 3 main buildings. I'm going to start off with the smallest one, or work our way upwards, and this one on the side here is meant to be a bit of a jail cell. This is the jail where in the show, Sophie Jones is held, but in this set, I guess you can imagine the animals are held. And the way this works is that you have a monstrous piranha plant here, but pushing it downwards, if you push it hard enough, let me just try to get that aligned right. In theory, there you go, allows you to break out of the jail cell. I think I just didn't have that one in quite correctly, but the idea is that you're supposed to be able to break your animals out here, so let's just try that one more time. Okay, maybe the parts are just a little sticky. You're supposed to be able to stage a breakout by pushing down on this lever, but you also do have a slide for the goblins to, I guess, just play in. Maybe that's how they get around, like one of them is manning the top part, and he slides down and goes down to the bottom and just goes out from there. So that's just a cool little function. You have another one of the builds for the piranha plants here, and on the inside there is yet another bed. Yes, once again we have the quintessential LEGO Elves bed in the building, and you have a bit of a depiction of the Goblin King's fortress here, although this depiction is kind of strange because it doesn't really resemble the actual set, and I have to wonder if that was maybe the prototype of the Goblin King's castle before they changed it around. Now, moving alongside here, you have different keys to the jail cell, as well as a very simple rudimentary cell on the back, but overall this is honestly not one of the more interesting buildings because it basically is just a prison with a slide on top of it. I do like, however, that they have the elemental symbol here, showcasing you're supposed to use Farin's Earth Elf powers to actually move the plant to use the roots to break the cell open, which is just a nice little touch, again indicating those action features by elemental powers. The second largest building here is the blacksmith shop, and one of the actual goblins here is meant to man it. You can see some blacksmithing tools on the goblin torso printing, which is quite nice, and I really like how they did the little doors here. It's obviously scaled down towards a miniature goblin as opposed to a mini doll, but you have these little opening doors that just swing open. You also have a piranha plant that's chewing on a bone, which is quite funny to see that it's eaten some unsuspecting prey, and on the inside you have just a little bit of a chicken leg being roasted on a fire. The chicken leg did also appear in the animated show, showcasing a really nice set congruency and a super simple feature where you can hammer on the axe here to cut the planks of wood for a prison cart, which also features in the set, but unfortunately I couldn't find my copy. Once again, the upper level is home to a bed, and unfortunately there is no easy way for the goblins to get from one level to another. Usually the LEGO Elves sets are pretty good at doing that, but for this one they just didn't have the room for a ladder or staircase, so the bed is just by itself and you have a little beetle in a jar on the side here. One thing I like about this build is the color scheme being the olive green with purple and the foliage being these dark blue tree leaves going alongside it. It just really adds a lot to the aesthetic of the Goblin King's fortress and the Goblin King's aesthetic, and it is a different aesthetic compared to anything we've seen in Elves so far. And finally, we can take a look at the largest building, and I think that essentially this largest building is supposed to be like a mineral store or a rare gem store, which you can see on the side here with one of the crystals growing out of the side of the building. You can open up the door here and see on the inside they actually are inspecting some rare gems on the inside here. There's a goblin newspaper, which is quite funny, showcasing the plant there as well as a goblin gem, and you've got more gems in the crate here as well as a little side entrance where you can actually have your animals crawl in and out of. On the top here, I can only imagine this is a goblin toilet, where you have the toilet bowl in wood, and then just a piece of leaf there, which I don't know what you're supposed to do with that piece of leaf, but you know, it is there. Maybe you can use it to wipe yourself, so to speak, on the toilet. And then finally, on the upper level, you guessed it, there is, yes, a little bed for Beeblin, for him to sleep when he's not playing his instrument, of course, and annoying all of those around him. Now, as you move the building around, you will notice that a lot of these buildings are fairly two-dimensional, like many of the other elves' buildings, but they make for a really nice and small, charming village. I actually kind of like the aesthetic of the Goblin Village, and I especially like how it scales next to the characters, both in the animation and with actual mini-doll characters. You can see here it's the perfect scale for the goblins, but since mini-dolls are a lot larger, it almost feels like they're walking around this kind of super-scale, small-scale playhouse area, which just adds to the very whimsical aesthetic of these buildings. It is pretty rare for LEGO to do mini-doll style buildings in a scale that isn't meant to scale with mini-dolls, but it's meant to scale with smaller characters, and I like how since this is meant to scale with these small characters, they were able to do a lot more with a lot less pieces. Now, talking about the price of this set, this was the largest set in March of the LEGO Elves theme, again retailing for $60 when it came out for 637 pieces. $76 today is not bad for this, but I feel like $70 is a much more fair price, meaning that when this came out, it probably should have been closer to $55, but compared to some of the more egregious examples on the list, I don't actually mind this one too much, and I do quite like the way they were able to do this. But now, let's move on to another Goblin focus set, and that is the Goblin King's Evil Dragon. The next set to delve into here is actually one of my all-time favorite LEGO Elf sets, and that is 41183, the Goblin King's Evil Dragon. It retailed for $30 or 30 euros, came with 339 pieces when it launched on March 1st, 2017, and came with two minifigures, the Goblin King without his amulet this time, and the Goblin Gimblin, who is exclusive to this set. It also came with a small little family of bears for the Goblin King to terrorize. So the story behind this is that this is Ashwing, the Goblin King's dragon. The elves encounter this first in a flashback of Rosalind telling them the story of Ashwing, the Earth Dragon, and later actually have to do battle against Ashwing when he's corrupted with evil magic. The story is that Ashwing was once the best friend of the Goblin King Cronin before they turned evil. Back then she was playful and happy, but now mind control has turned her mad. She's now kept in chains underneath the Goblin King's fortress and is incredibly vicious. The only way to break her from the mind control is for Rosalind to eventually heal this dragon, although it has been many years of Ashwing acting under the evil influence. This is a really cool backstory for the dragon, and it served as one of the most powerful and scary opponents in the Elvendale series. I think the reason why I love this dragon so much is the articulation, and let me get into that in a second, but first we're going to take a look at the smaller side build and just investigate the bit of scenery that came in the set. This is a small little crystal growth, which, as you can see, is being exploited by the evil goblins as they try to use dynamite to blow it up and take the crystals inside. The way it works is you press in on the dynamite, that causes this Borak eye element to flip upwards, exploding the crystal and revealing an evil-looking green crystal underneath. It's a very simple function, but one that works pretty well, and I like how you can use the goblin as kind of like a demolitions expert here. You can see it has some crystals in the pouch, and he's just getting the dynamite ready, and kaboom, goes ahead and explodes it to be able to steal the crystals inside. This, of course, disrupts the habitat of the bears who are now in peril, having a bit of conflict in the set, but the main focus is, of course, on the dragon. So let's set all this aside and take a look at Ashwing, the evil dragon. Now this is super cool. I think the reason why I like this so much is it technically is more like a wyvern. It doesn't have 4 legs, it has 2 legs, and the 2 arms are actually on the wings. That being said, because of this, you can actually pose it up in really nice ways. The wings are actually mounted on dual ball joints, and they made use of recolors of the CCBS Hero Factory elements in armor pieces here to allow you to really flap the wings and go crazy with how you want this to be folded. You could have it arcing downwards or using the claws to stretch out to attack an enemy. It's just so cool how you can move this around. The head itself is mounted on different ball joints, so you can actually move the head back and forth on the ball joints, and they even have the brick-built tongue here. If you open up the jaw, you have a little red piece being used for the tongue to really add to the menace of this dragon with a gold crown itself. Now, my favorite part of the dragon, though, is probably the way they did the legs. Because obviously, if you saw the previous video about the Dragon Year of Elves, I really didn't like how restricted they were in articulation. But this absolutely solves a lot of the problems. Yes, they are only able to rotate on one axis, but you know why this is now very good this time? Well, they actually allow you to bend the feet on click hinges. Because of this, you can really have the feet outstretched. You can have this in a really cool walking position. You can have this bent all the way backwards. This is like the extent to which you can really have this walking to show the amount of movement you can get out of the legs. Overall, it is super cool how you actually have the option to bend it back and forth as it's walking and stalking the prey. And this is just such a cool display to see. Like, look at this crazy pose that you can get the dragon into. I just wish that all the dragons had articulation like this. Of course, the movement of the legs isn't the only thing. You can bend the individual claws back and forth as well as up and down. The legs are kind of digitigrade style legs, so they just look super cool in the way they're done, and easily this is my favorite part of the dragon. I love how they pulled this off. It looks so menacing as it's flying through the air, and it easily makes for one of the coolest enemy dragons we've ever gotten from LEGO. At $30 adjusted for inflation, for $40-ish today, $40-$45, this is admittedly a little high, but honestly, I don't even mind it that much because the dragon is so good. It is so much fun to pose this. You can do a lot of stuff with it. There's room on the back of the dragon to seat not just Cronin, the Goblin King, but you can also seat the goblin with him so they can kind of ride together if you so please. It just is everything I would want to have out of a villain dragon, and I just really love the way they were able to pull it off. It's super cool. It is a menacing set. It is one of my favorite, if not my favorite dragon that we got from LEGO Elves in the design. The color scheme coming in spring yellowish green is awesome, and this is definitely one of the strongest sets of the wave. But now we move on to the penultimate set, which actually is the smallest set of the first wave, the Gondola. As the conflict against Cronin the Goblin King heats up, this is the first ever LEGO set depiction of Nida going, you know what, I think I can fix him. And so, Nida, due to her initial affections for Cronin the Goblin King when he charmed the elves in the first episode, decides that she can talk him out of what he's doing and takes a lone gondola to the Goblin King's fortress to try to negotiate with him, to understand his side of the story. She had heard all sorts of horrible things about him from his ex Rosalind, but wants to go to the source himself and try to understand why he's doing the things he's doing. And in doing so, she actually forms a connection with Cronin, understanding more behind why he is evil and his motivations to free his mother, even though eventually it turns out that she cannot in fact fix him, and he tries to lock her up in a cage at the end of their conversation. However, this set is the journey to the Goblin King's fortress, and it is the smallest set of the wave, coming in at only $10. This came with two minifigures, one of which was unique to the set, the Goblin Roblin, which is the magenta-haired goblin, and retailed for $10 with around 67 pieces, which would be around $12 today. It's a nice little entry set, but honestly, not the most interesting build in my opinion. You just have a little gondola for Nida to be able to sail down the river to, and there is a little bit of goblin forest on the side here with a catapult where the goblin can fling these little fruits over to assault her on her journey, but otherwise there's honestly not that much going on with this set. I definitely feel like it's an okay introduction, but compared to some of the other smaller introduction sets for elves, like the ones that included baby dragons and dragon eggs and so on and so forth, those definitely are a lot more interesting than this. This is just kind of a small little impulse buy, and I do like how they did represent it in the story as an actual important story moment of Nida breaking off from the main group and trying to reason with the Goblin King herself, but otherwise it's just a small thing. Maybe if they included one of those piranha plants, that would have been a little bit more exciting or fun for the action of the set, but as it is, to be honest, I don't have much to say about this one. It's just a little thing and we can move on. And finally, we have the last and best LEGO Elves set from 2017. This is 41188 Breakout from the Goblin King's Fortress. It came with 695 pieces and retailed for $70 when it released on June 1st, 2017, which adjusted for inflation is around $88 today. It came with 4 minifigures, technically all of which are exclusive to the set because it comes with Emily with Amulet, as well as a Goblin Tufflin, the Goblin King with his amulet, plus Sophie Jones with a closed mouth smile as opposed to the open mouth variant that we saw in the other sets. Altogether, I do kind of feel like it should probably have included at least one more goblin for the Goblin King's fortress. Heck, the Goblin King village included 3, so why not at least throw in 2 here? But otherwise, I'm pretty happy with what they were able to accomplish with this set. Now, this is a location that appeared multiple times in the story, but we really wouldn't see the final showdown until, of course, the final episodes of the show. Here, the Goblin King manages to seize Emily's amulet, and together with the combined powers of both amulets, he is able to open a dark portal to Earth. Unfortunately, through this process, shadow monsters begin to materialize, and he realizes he is dealing with powers outside of his control. Eventually, through a vision sequence, he reunites with his mother, who he's really trying to free this entire time by utilizing the power of the portal to free her from her imprisonment. After having a heart-to-heart with his mother, he realizes what he's doing is wrong, and he is embarked on his twisted quest for the wrong reasons, doing the bad things in order to accomplish a goal that he never really should have set out to do in the first place, because his mother tapped into dark magic and is now facing the consequences. Because of that, he realizes the error of his ways, shuts off the portal, and joins the elves in their fight against evil, eventually joining their side and becoming a hero. It's a really interesting plotline and story that happened here, and obviously I'm leaving out a lot of detail, but this was the site of the final battle against Cronin, where they faced off against the Goblin King's evil forces. Setting aside the figures, let's take a look at what you can do with this incredibly detailed fortress. And the designers of the set actually stated that they were inspired by Minas Morgul from Lord of the Rings when crafting the eerie green glow on the walls here, which looks super cool, and you can clearly see the Lord of the Rings influences with the eye symbol here as well as the spikes on the castle. It just is so cool, and I feel like with a recolor could easily pass off as like a Lord of the Rings inspired set. The entire castle on the lower levels is guarded by these vicious snapping plants, one of which is mounted on a mixel joint here, and the other one has a really fun play feature where if you spin a gear on the back, it actually rotates the mouths of the plants back and forth, having them snap open and shut, which is again one of my favorite snapping plant themed functions here. This is so cool how they were able to make this work. I really love the functionality, and it's very nice how you can automatically activate it, meaning that you can basically just ensnare anybody in its claws without having to even lay a finger on the plants. One of my favorite details here is how the vines of the tree wrap around the castle, and when talking to the LEGO set designers in an interview, they revealed that the initial prototype version of the set had a lot more foliage, and they had a ton of plants surrounding it, but due to budget reasons, they really had to scale back on that and just focus on the main building. While I think that they definitely should have maybe included a little bit more foliage, I do like what they did manage to include, and the vines wrapping around the fortress are just such a cool design to have. Moving on to the top here, you have a cage for Sophie Jones as well as the throne of the Goblin King, which can be rotated, and the main centerpiece of the set is this portal, a specialized printed dish element which they typically use for TIE Fighter windscreens, showcasing the dark portal to the center of the evil amulet, allowing Cronin to free his mother. Now, the front here you can see is a nice drawbridge, and the way this works is you just rotate the gear and this can close up. It's just a simple set of Technic lift arms, but I think it works pretty well to actually have the fortress be closed up, and on the inside there's actually quite a nice interior. Once more we have the quintessential LEGO Elves bed, but my favorite aspect about this is that it implies that Cronin is sleeping on this really nice and ornate bed here, and then he like relegates the goblins to sleep on the floor next to him. Like the Goblin has a bed, but it's just like a smaller bed on the floor where he has the guard always sleeping by him at all times. That's a little funny detail. I always like how they have bed-related humor and bed-related builds in the LEGO Elves theme because, you know what, it's just kind of become a staple of the theme at this point. Here you can see a portrait of Cronin with his mother, one of the 5 mysterious elf witches who used their magic initially for good, but eventually she turned evil. And then over here you have the quintessential elves fireplace. Maybe, I'm starting to realize that a fireplace is also in every elf set. Maybe that and the bed is kind of a ubiquitous thing across here, but you can see as well on the inside you've got some bookcases, plus you have a little ingredient on how to turn a plant utilizing a potion into a vicious man-eating plant on the inside there. Going up to the second levels, unfortunately there is no easy way to be able to access the second levels. One thing I do want to point out though is that there is a secret entrance to the castle on the side here, on the side of the gate. This swings open, and this is actually featured in the show as well, so you can see this secret castle entrance pivot onwards. But you have the first upper level here, where the Goblin King is writing a book of sorts, which is mounted here. There's nothing on the inside of the book, but it is a nice little accessory for the Goblin King. There is a key that you need to retrieve from the plants to be able to free Sophie Jones, and otherwise there's just a small little catapult here, nothing much to see there. And finally, the entire back of the set is dominated by the portal, so there also isn't really that much of an interior there. A lot of what you see here is what you get. Overall, for $80 in today's money, I think this is a really solid set, and $70 back in 2017 was pretty good for something like this. I'm a big fan of how they pulled this off, and it might be my favorite villain building in all of Elves. It's a contest between this and Regana's Magic Shadow Castle, because that one was just simply a lot bigger, but I do like the color scheme on this one a lot more because it is a completely unique color scheme compared to really anything else we have seen from LEGO ever before or even since. The build is fantastic. I love how the portal is at the center of the build, but you also have so much other stuff that you can do around the castle, and this was a worthy final boss setting to have the final battle with Cronin. It was super cool actually seeing Emily wield a sword going into battle to rescue her sister Sophie. Just all sorts of play possibilities and patterns here, and I'm a big fan of how they were able to wrap up this final lineup of LEGO Elves. But now let's share my thoughts on the story, the sets as a whole, and talk a little bit about why I think that unfortunately these sets did not perform very well. So that was our summary of the Goblin Year of LEGO Elves. So what exactly happened in this year that made the sets not perform well? Honestly, in my opinion, it's kind of a tragedy how this just didn't really work out for LEGO Elves. The story, as you can probably tell, was the most in-depth, complex, and mature it had ever been. The animation was incredible, and it finally had a fully dedicated Netflix show to grow. So what happened? Well, to be completely honest, goblins are a little bit less marketable than dragons, and that is pretty much it. Sure, there are a ton of other factors that we can speculate on as to why this year just didn't perform quite as well as the others, but if you look at the sets, it's probably because they're a little bit less colorful. There are more sets dedicated towards the Goblin faction. There are villain-focused sets. There are sets that are focused mostly on conflict, and while there were sets like that in the prior 2 years, this was a very, very sudden turn to a very action-oriented theme. Even when you look back at 2016, while yes, the story did feature a villain, that villain only appeared in one set, and pretty much only one single set, her Shadow Castle, as well as freeing the Queen Dragon, was dedicated towards conflict. The first half of the year in 2016 was purely focused on the dragons. Now, do I think it was a mistake to focus this year on conflict and battle against the goblins and against the Goblin King? Absolutely not. I think these sets are arguably the best sets that LEGO Elves ever got. However, I do think it was a bit of a tonal shift, especially when compared to the prior years. 2015 started off with no conflict at all. 2016 really only had a hint of conflict in the sets, and especially if you weren't following the story, you could very easily go through the entire year of 2016 without even realizing there was a villain to begin with. And then all of a sudden, 2017 is focused on weapons and magical artifacts and battle with the goblins. And the goblins themselves being these kind of somewhat creepy looking figures that didn't really fit with the cutesy aesthetic of LEGO Elves, despite their exaggerated features. It was a bit of a tonal mishmash, and I think that LEGO realized that and would course correct this for future themes, but unfortunately, by the time that LEGO Elves came around, it was too late. You see, the way that LEGO works is that themes are typically planned to last around 3 years. If they do exceptionally well, 4th years are planned. And that's why that after the success of 2015, and especially after the really great success of 2016, which saw some really amazing sales for Elves, LEGO began to plan out not just 2017, but 2018 as well. But then, when 2017 didn't sell well, plans to continue LEGO Elves beyond 2018 were basically stopped right then and there, and LEGO had moved on to the next thing. Sure, even though 2018 did sell pretty well for LEGO Elves, they had already moved on. The internal team was dedicated to focusing on the next big thing. And unfortunately, because of 2017's poor performance, and because obviously they invested a lot of budget into the Netflix show, which didn't really pay its dividends, this was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back when it came to LEGO Elves. It's just such a shame that arguably the very best year of Elves, the year when the sets were at their best, the storytelling looked and was the best lore-wise, was the year that Elves performed the worst, and I hope that didn't send the wrong message to LEGO that young girls are not interested in action-adventure and fantasy themes. Although maybe it did, because we aren't really seeing stuff like this nowadays. The closest thing that came afterwards was DC Superhero Girls, and we all know how that theme ended up. And if you want to hear more about that theme, let me know in the comments, and I'll see if I can do a retrospective on that too. Otherwise, this was a really great year for Elves, but handicapped by the sets being more villain-focused, having more muted and arguably quote-unquote realistic colors, like again having the colors of the fortress inspired by stuff like Lord of the Rings. I feel like LEGO was just a little ahead of its time. Do I think a theme like LEGO Elves could do really well today? Absolutely. If LEGO were to put the same amount of love and dedication they spent on LEGO Elves on a modern theme today, as well as having a really expertly animated show, we've never seen a show animated like this from LEGO since and never seen one again, I feel like that could absolutely thrive, with more and more adults especially getting into LEGO and having an older audience for many of its original LEGO themes. But 2017 was just a little too ahead of its time for something like that. And so, that sadly sums up our coverage on the worst performing year of LEGO Elves yet, but what is, in my opinion, the best year of LEGO Elves. Thanks all so much for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon, and tune in next week for our conclusion as we sum up our look at the entire final year of LEGO Elves.